Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel, Read Good, Draw Bad, where we love to read really good and draw pretty darn bad. Today we are reading a fascinating book where we follow the life of a young anti-hero who can't seem to do anything right. And no, I'm not talking about myself or Taylor Swift. It's The Adventures of Augie Marsh by Saul Bellow. Just so you know, I'm doing a reading challenge where I'm reading the top 100 novels as decided by the Modern Library of the 20th century. You can find more information in the description below. First, a TLDR on this book. This book is about being a loser in the Great Depression. I wish it wasn't, but it really is. It's about being a loser. And I mean that somewhat seriously because we're going to compare three very different brothers in this book. And I think it's important. So we have Simon, the oldest brother, who is someone who marries rich so that he can get away from his poor family. I sort of place him somewhere between a scumbag and a genius, but more on the scumbag side. He marries a woman so he'll never be poor again, and eventually takes over that family's business. And he is constantly playing a game to show a front of what a great, big, important man he is so that other people will take him seriously. He becomes incredibly unhappy overall and lives the life of what you consider a standard unhappy rich person. Now, if we go to the youngest brother, George, he is someone who's born with a fair number of intellectual disabilities. And he is eventually, not because they want to, but because as a poor family they have few choices, George is eventually committed to a sanitarium for the rest of his life. He gets his life choices taken away from him by society, by his family, where Simon feels maybe trapped by being rich. George is physically trapped because he is someone who's considered not fit for normal society. But George is neither violent nor dangerous, as far as I can tell in this book, but he's just someone who's considered not an asset to the family in terms of making money and therefore is required to be put into care, which is really sad. I really like George in this book. And then we have Augie Marsh, who's the middle child. And like most middle children, he's a loser. Augie is basically someone who falls into weird situations that would be a great starter for most great American novels and manages to screw up every single situation that he gets himself into. He really gives off George Costanza vibes the entire book in terms of his ability to fail forward and fail fast. And the one good thing though is he's a likable loser. So even though you don't always like the things he does in this book, there is a certain element of wonder or interesting values that he has from time to time during the book when he can sort of, keep it together. The problem I have with Augie is he spends so much time pondering what he wants to do during his life that it feels like he's watching life pass him by for basically the entire book. And that becomes a very frustrating element of this book as it goes on and on and on. There are times where he does make a positive moral choice or does make a positive change in his life. And so he always is on the verge of doing something great. He has a high failure rate in this book. Part of his problem is that every time he tries to make something a success, there's someone who's smarter than him or richer than him that is using Augie for their benefit, whether it's Simon or some other millionaire. So I do feel bad for Augie, and I do think that a lot of the problems were not self-created, but just this guy just really does not succeed. Okay, let me give you a quick plot breakdown because I think it will help explain this sense of why his failure rate is so high. So a few spoilers, but I feel it's really important. He starts by living with his other two brothers and his nearly blind mother and his very strict and controlling grandmother. He gets a job with a guy named Einhorn who makes him do all sorts of weird, odd jobs, and even though Einhorn does nothing but make fun of him and insult him and treat him poorly, Augie still sees him as a kind of father figure because it's kind of the only one he's ever known. But even still, Augie learns important, valuable life lessons from working for essentially a scumbag, and he takes those further in life to try and not be as manipulated by other rich people or other people in his life later in life. However, he does get manipulated by other people later in his life, but he's really trying, okay? He eventually starts working at a horse ranching store, so I guess that's the equivalent of working at a sports fishing store or something. And for one reason or another, he ends up being adopted by a very rich couple who actually really like Augie for who he is. However, for some reason, Augie finds this really off-putting. He legitimately leaves behind the only element of like a stable family he could have had in his life and goes back to the people who were bad to him. So he really messed that one up. That's all I'm going to say. In a normal novel, the poor orphan Annie who's taken in by the Mr. Big Bucks, usually the poor orphan says, I'm going to stay with Mr. Big Bucks. But this orphan did not. This orphan did not. Augie then tries to sell rubber paint as an entrepreneur and salesman, and that fails catastrophically. I guess rubber paint wasn't as big a deal as people thought it would be. He becomes a traveling bum as he runs out of money because he spent it all on rubber paint. And by time he stops traveling and eventually finds his way home, he finds out his grandmother has died and his brother Simon has spent all of their mother's rent money on gambling and hookers. Augie eventually makes friends with people in college from some of the people he used to know, and as an entrepreneur that he really is, he starts stealing textbooks from local bookstores and reselling them to people for money. But while he still steals these textbooks, he actually reads them and therefore develops his own kind of university education. So he suddenly becomes somewhat educated through thievery, which is kind of like, is that like America? Like steal it and then profit? I don't know. Now at this point, Simon finds a woman to marry rich, which is really exciting because then their family can stop being poor. However, Simon needs to prove that he comes from a good family and he can't bring the mentally disabled brother or the blind mother because those won't fit in with the rich people. So Simon's only choice is to bring Augie to these rich people family dinners, and Augie performs well enough that Simon can be accepted into this rich family. Simon, in his one good brother moment, tries really hard to set Augie up with another rich girl so that they can be rich scumbags together. However, Augie actually has a good moment of conscience and realizes he does not want to be rich and unhappy, and he sees what's going to happen to Simon. He then makes more college friends and goes to help out a lady friend, Mimi, who tries to have an abortion, but the abortion is botched and she almost dies. That was a really unpleasant part of the book. He then falls in love with Thea, who's obsessed with hawks, and Augie and her go to some really remote place to go raise hawks. Eventually, and I don't know why this took Augie so long to figure out, but Augie realized that Thea loves the hawks more than she loves him. He's really just kind of her placeholder boyfriend. While at a party, he falls in love with a woman named Stella, who he eventually tries to rescue from some sort of weird drug ring that I never really understood in the book. Some mafia thing. I don't know. And so him and Stella go to live what Augie thinks will be the life of their dreams because he has done what all American good male heroes should do. He rescued a woman from criminals. Then he gets a job working as a ghostwriter for a millionaire. And by this point, you should realize that Augie Marsh is basically a social worker for rich people. Every time he interacts with them, they start telling him all their problems. And he's like a really great psychotherapist for them. Augie eventually joins the Marines and their boat sinks, and he gets stuck in a life raft with a guy who gets boat madness. The boat madness guy tries to kill them both. And the only reason they live is because Augie has a perverse will to live even in the face of all of his problems, and he manages to hail down a boat to save them. He gets back together with Stella, who he thinks is the love of his life, only to find out Stella has been cheating on him basically the entire time. And the story ends with Augie stuck in a snowdrift with a maid. And that's it. The book ends in a snowdrift. And I felt adrift at the end of this book. What even was this plot? Was there a plot? There was vibes. This book is built on vibes. Now, if we talk about the themes, thematically, this book is about being an American hero. And I think you can tell that by the plot descriptions I gave you because each and every one of them sound like the start of an action superhero movie. However, none of them end properly. None of these stories end with Augie becoming the hero of the story. And I read a really interesting essay of literary criticism by Robert R. Dutton, who describes the problem in this book that is really frustrating when you read it. First, the novel is seen to be a story in which a picturesque hero, who is also the narrator, advances through a series of adventures which in varying degrees and natures are relevant to a general life experience. Second, the work is regarded as Bellow's strictures on the existing relationship between literature and society. More specifically, Augie March is a fictional history of American literature. Third, the character and the experiences of Bellow's hero may be seen as encompassing a contemporary human condition, as well as dramatizing the wider and deeper commitment on literature and society. So that was a lot of word salad, but I'm going to simplify it to say a lot of the stories in this book sound like they could all be their own book. They all sound like the start of a new story for Augie. And this is the thing. I really felt every time Augie moved locations or talked to a new character, it was the start of basically an entirely new novel. But it's always ended short by a sad, an unfortunate circumstance, or by Augie's own decisions in this book. And this is an important thing. I think the author really wants Augie to fail. He wants this idea of an all-American hero to fail, and fail hard. So instead of being a hero who is courageous, wise, and decisive, Augie instead is someone who is quite fearful and indecisive and unwise in most of his choices. He has all of the story points necessary to build him up to be a hero and someone who meets the moment of the day or has a wild revelation that really impacts us as readers. But unfortunately, he never gets there. He ends up in a snowdrift. Like, I don't even know what that means, because every time he's offered money or the chance to succeed and he doesn't know where he wants to go, but he's waiting for it to happen. He's waiting for the moment to arrive. And therefore, I think the author is making a point about how he sees young men in America, which I think is still very relevant today, because it's hard to sell people the American dream if you don't have a great everyman, a man who can stand in front of an action or a challenge and succeed. Now, onto the review. This book is a toss-up for me. And I say this having read Saul Bellow before and connected like super deeply to the kind of writing he does and the kind of themes that he puts into his work. And here is the problem. I think if I'd never read The Catcher in the Rye, I would have loved this book. Or at least I would have found it a really, really, really good book. The problem is I have read Catcher in the Rye. So let's do a comparison between these two books. Is there an important relationship between brothers in this book? Check. Is there a theme of mental health for different characters? Check. Is the main character a young man who is indecisive and on a journey? Check. Is this young man confused about the future? Double check. Are there rich people and adults galore who mess up his life? Triple check. Does the main character have some really strange relationships with women in this book? Check, 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 check. It really sucks because I can't help but compare Saul Bellow to J.D. Salinger, which seems really unfair, but it's there because of the structure of this book. And I hate to say it, but I feel like you can read this book or Catcher in the Rye, but not both, because they're just really the same kind of book trying to say the same kind of thing. I feel like even though these books are different in the way that The Catcher in the Rye is short and this book is quite long, I also feel Saul Bellow's driving different conclusions home at the end of this book. But at the same time, I really think the themes are so strong in both books that it's really hard to say which one of these you need to read. But what I will say in favor of this book is that you will get some of the most beautiful passages out of what was the Great Depression, and beautiful passages of writing that really explain the feeling and the moment of that time. As much as I hated Simon in this book, and I hated what Simon did in this book, I also understood what Simon was doing and why he did it. And you can even say in Simon's favor in this book, he at least decided what he was going to do with his life. So take this quote of this conversation between Simon and Augie. "So when are you going to start doing what you're going to do?" says Simon. "I wish I knew, but it seems to be one of those things you just can't rush." Well, people don't trust you if they don't know what you do, and you can't blame them. I feel like Augie only acts passively, and he only comes to fruition when there's a real emergency, and then you start to see the measure of his character. But otherwise, he doesn't bring out any sort of heroic-like qualities. Anyways, I do think this is a good book, and if you're interested in contemplating life and feeling very contemplative, this could be a great book for you. Okay, that's all I want to talk about this book for today. If you liked this review, please like, share, and subscribe, and you can hit the bell notification whenever I release a new video. If you have thoughts about this book, feel free to leave them in the comments below. Do you like Saul Bellow's writing? Do you like his depiction of young men in this book? I'd love to know in the comments below. Next time, we will be reading one of my all-time favorite books on this list, and I'm so excited to talk about it, Brideshead Revisited by Evelyn Waugh. Okay, well, that's all for me this time. I hope you're having an excellent week and a wonderful time reading a wonderful book. As always, stay curious, stay reading.